Empathy versus sympathy. Naturally, I was online doing some stuff and I got pointed out. So, uh, the thing that I liked the most about it was this reference. Empathy is a skill, while sympathy is an emotion. I instantly wrote it down. I didn't really consider it too much. But if I were to consider it, do they really complement each other? Or are they kind of like approached separately? I don't know. I would assume that my experience with empathy that got me a lot of frustration, right? Because like when you're starting to consider everything beyond your realm, your reality, you're starting to consider other people's reality. Effectively, you're allowing different kinds of thoughts and feelings and experiences to kind of like affect your mind. That required that when it came to me, I didn't think I had the character to maintain myself throughout the endeavor. Or at the very least, I wasn't able to engage with myself and with others' realities, and with myself again and others' realities. I let myself go way too much to a point where I just didn't understand where I started and where everything else started. But the minute I read it as a skill, empathy being a skill, my entire kind of like mental structure got shooketh. Just literally, like, what are you doing? Where are we? And what are the things that make it a successful approach? Why would somebody, if we were to approach empathy from a skills perspective, how will we take our first steps? On the top of my head, I'd imagine maybe listening, maybe, and again, like listening is quite intricate because what are you listening? Who are you listening to? And I talked about it before, and there's an actual note here about the different 3 ways to assimilate with somebody while actively trying to listen. And it's funny because with one, I'm believing what you're saying. The other one, I'm believing that you believe what you're saying. And the third one is believing that you is trusting that that is your truth. The last one is like super deep because you have to kind of like show certain strength and character, certain kind of like determination, like inspiring even. Because when you're talking to somebody and they're believing that that's what you, how you see the world, that means you're expressing a lot of you, which is fascinating because that kind of like embodies a certain kind of like, I don't know, certain understanding of oneself. But empathy as a skill versus sympathy, which is an emotion. Do we start? I don't necessarily feel sympathetic, and I, for the longest time, I used to feel that sympathy is a sign of disrespect. I don't know. Maybe I just saw myself. I saw myself as an individual more from I'm given everything that I can take, or everything that is needed, which is like a healthy mind, a healthy body, and all that stuff, in order for me to approach life. But a big part of my naivety is taking for granted the fact that I was the house I was living in, the parents I had, the food I consumed, the schools I went to. All of these build you because the environment kind of like supports a lot of things about you and allows you to think and consider stuff differently. And the most of our naivety is lack of exposure, which probably is the lack of empathy that we have. Because if all we see is the life that's in front of us, then ultimately we can't begin to comprehend how other people might live their life. And that's something probably important to discuss. That's something probably, I think that's probably something that should be approached at a young age, because then you actually grow up with the skill the same way like musicians grow up with their instruments and athletes grow up with their like athleticism and sports and activity and any kind of thing that you start at a younger age and you explore, you kind of like grow with it differently. You don't have the limitations at an older time and space. I don't know. It kind of feels like we're more constructed as we develop, as we get older, we get more opinionated, maybe. We're a lot more susceptible when you were younger. That's definitely the case. But to actually be able to like approach empathy from an adult stage, my experience with it was complete exposure and then returning from it. But I don't know if that was sympathy that triggered, that allowed me to lose myself. Because, like, once you start feeling sad or bad for the other side that you're trying to be empathetic with, are you really being honest with them? Are you being true to them? Are you being yourself with them? Doesn't that make mean that you start treating them differently and acting differently around them? Which isn't really like the respect that people deserve. Well, the reality, if you're not empathetic, or if you're empathetic without sympathy, then you would also probably lose yourself because ultimately you start feeling the same way they do, and basically counting the relying for focusing. You start focusing on the needs because you're understanding the other side's perspective. And instead of being a support for them to be able to evolve or for them to be able to get over what's what's requiring your empathy. Because sometimes it could just be like a small issue I'm trying to learn, and other times it could be just a full blown approach to life. And I feel either way there has to be this, it's not empathy versus sympathy. It's how empathy and sympathy kind of like do the dance between one to kind of like have the feeling and one to utilize the skill, one to be able to engage with people in an empathetic way but still be able to maintain your respect for them, and one to sympathize with them and still not lose that respect. It's the respect that's in between, right? Because ultimately, while we're engaging with people, it's always about the position we're placing them in when it comes to us. And our goal, if we're trying to explore life through love and understanding and like giving, forgiving, and acceptance, then we have to put these people and make sure we never slip arrogantly or even kind of like sell ourselves short when it comes to how we're acting with them. And the best way to do so is to look at ourselves through their lens, because then we'll be able to engage with ourselves, with the conversation, engage with the relationship, engage with the dynamic of the relationship and the purpose, right? Because like some people are family, other people are just, I don't know, friends, acquaintances, other people, wives and children, and just co-workers, adults, strangers. We always have to find a way that we don't really put ourselves either down or up. And it's always seeing yourself from a different person's perspective. And the only way you can do that is to understand when to be sympathetic and when to be empathetic. And how do you build both these skills to harmonize together? I don't know. But I feel I'm onto something. I feel like this the training of the relationship, right? I talked about it before. It's just like every relationship is a trainable dynamic. And ultimately, there's a way for the back and forth in order for both of you to be good. And I really think the better way to handle such a relationship is not for a master slash. There's no obedience and basically there's nobody that's in charge and the other person is obedient. It's more of when somebody's leading, the other person's appending, and when the other person is leading, the other person's appending, and there has to be kind of like this movement. And sometimes a part of the one side of the relationship will have to do a bit more effort, and this is probably the empathy and sympathy that's always trying to engage in respect, because we're always biased to how we think and how we want to do things. When it depends on why we want this to work, or why we want this conversation to be a smooth one, or why we just kind of like have to maintain our integrity, even though we don't really care sometimes. And that kind of stuff, I think, is the core of respect. So maybe empathy as a skill is literally the counterpart of sympathy as an emotion. And it allows us to see objectively and subjectively the relationship. Cool beans. Thanks, guys.